a Mile 2019 Open Innovation Challenge.
Great. Well, it's really great to be here. Certainly not the presentation that I was anticipating giving, but at the same time, let's see, let me switch this around here. But at the same time, I know I had this, I'm the graphic designer amongst us, and yeah, I suppose I should have an amazing presentation, but the one before me that suggested that, the better learning is not to have words and type up there saying the same thing that you're saying. So that's part of why I decided to just talk about the project. First of all, I'd like to just say a thank you to everyone that voted for my project and made my partnership with TLT a possibility with this. I am so tremendously new to the academic world. For those of you that don't know, I graduated from Penn State in design in 1987 and have been in New York City for 32 years in the business, and I love it. And but my interest began to become more immersive, more tech focused as publishing, which was my primary thing, was wrapping up. So it's really amazing to be here. I want to thank my team, my leader, Zach Lonsinger. He has been a really powerful lead in this. He took a project that honestly, one of my things I want to emphasize in the beginning of this to anyone who is listening right now or knows somebody that is toying with an idea but don't feel like it's developed well enough to even approach TLT, talk to them. Because an awful lot of what I'm going to talk about here is how my project has evolved because of their involvement. And I think had I, at the symposium that I spoke at, had to define TLT, I think I would have been wrong. And I would have created a much shorter list than I should have for what they can actually do to help realize these projects that a lot of us faculty are imagining. So I also want to thank Janae Robert for her input in helping me understand research, because out in the big world, our research and development, we just launch. I don't know anything about IRBs and all of those kind of things. And Janae was brilliant at holding my hand through all that process. Brad Kozak, I want to thank you, Brad, for your input and our numerous conversations that helped me think more deeply about things. Again, not an element that I would have suspected to have at TLT, but was certainly powerful. And Dan Getz, your immersive video expertise and your testing the cameras and all of that is definitely going to, when we complete this project, is definitely going to bring the best out of it. So I just wanted to first say thank you. For anyone listening to this, again, I can't sell TLT enough. You may be faculty of many, many years or decades, and I still think you need to, if you've got ideas about things, just meet with them. They're amazingly in touch with so many things at TLT. It's just, they are such a powerful resource for me. They help me rewrite syllabuses and develop curriculum for other things. They're amazing. Please, TLT is a powerful resource. They're not paying me for this. It's just the reality. They are amazing. So the three areas I want to focus on that helped me and helped evolve this project was, they know so many people across so many disciplines in this university and even outside of it. Obviously, we all, even just in their name, we know that they have access to tech. But they also can help with everything. Like I mentioned, Janae, with the research elements that I was unfamiliar with. How do I do the whole IRB thing? She gave me total ease about it, and I'm looking through some of that paperwork now, but she's definitely going to be the person that gets me through that. But some of the contents, and I'll just mention their names and then I'm going to get into the project directly. Katie Kosteritz and Susan Russell were two names. TLT just fired a tremendous number of names at me within the first 2 weeks of the project. And it was overwhelming, to be honest. But like, as we rolled forward, names would come back around. They would bring them back around. And that's how this project evolved. So no matter where you are with things, talk to them, because you might feel like your project is not somewhere. They can help you get it there. So now, one of the first, so I went into this, and what I pitched at the symposium was a very art-directed, written, scripted, acted, performed, a very precisely articulated communication vehicle in this immersive video that I would use my art directing skills. And I even met with the director of theater here at the university to talk to him about writers and actors and access to all these things. And so TLT, one of the first things they did for me was connect me with an Oculus Go. Well, that was amazing, because that I began to go through tremendous amounts of content on that. And what I noticed was that, especially because some of this stuff is experimental, the content was not so slick and fancy. Someone's asking what an Oculus Go is. Oculus is the VR company that Facebook owns. They've got several different equipment, and Oculus is the one that most of the industry is watching and anticipating that will be the one that will probably put VR glasses into most of the masses' hands. They're hitting the price point the fastest that makes it affordable, and the quality of their product is pretty serious. So Oculus is likely the company that will put virtual reality into everybody's hands. And they are owned by Facebook, who has the power to do it. So, the list of names, let me just, they put this Oculus Go, and I started to question this idea of crafting this thing for authenticity, because even in the raw state that a lot of these videos were, there was this kind of brilliant authenticity to them that I thought, maybe would make this more approachable. I do believe it was Brad that shared the articles. We started sharing articles about empathy, and in one of the articles, they talked about empathy being much more complicated than I think I was approaching this as. I think I was approaching this as the magic Ativan pill that would put everyone at ease and start to calm the polarized state that we are currently living in, almost everywhere in the world, not just here in the US. And one of these articles that was shared, I believe, by Brad, it mentioned the complication of this, and then it brought up a book called, where are we here? Brought up a book called The Dark Side of Empathy. Now, the thing about the dark side of empathy, again, I think we all were approaching it from the beginning, realizing that empathy maybe is not a magic pill. It didn't take us long before we started to determine that. But in this book, they get into how complicated some of this can get. Now, this book is by Fritz Breithaupt. Again, it's The Dark Side of Empathy. It was written in 2017. And he gets into the complication that empathy can create, including, because it was written in 2017, Trump was mentioned in this. And though Fritz doesn't have fond comments of Trump, which makes him a friend of mine, that he mentioned that he does understand the power of empathy, of how empathizing with a particular group, if you can make those attachments, can drive this polarization. In it, one of the first chapters in the book, Nietzsche refers to empathy as the enemy of self. And he gets into how human survival has been based in our ability to survive, and survival is a selfish thing. And so Nietzsche, you know, went on about like empathy is the enemy of our survival. Himmler with the Nazis also, and I'll read this right out of the book, there's a woman, Hannah Arendt, who wrote about Nietzsche, about Himmler, and that he actually used empathy in order to do the atrocious things that he did. Where she writes her comment here is, hence the problem was how to overcome not so much their conscience as the animal pity by which all normal men are affected in the presence of physical suffering. The trick used by Himmler, who apparently was rather strongly afflicted by these instinctive reactions himself, the horror of what he was doing, he was very simple and probably very effective. It consisted in turning these instincts around, as it were, in directing them toward himself. So that instead of saying what horrible things I did to people, the murderers would be able to say what horrible things I had to watch in the pursuance of my duties, how heavily the task weighed upon my shoulders. So suddenly empathy was not such an easy thing. Suddenly I was beginning to question crafting this thing so carefully. Suddenly I was realizing that even empathy has contributed to our polarized state, and now we were going to have to figure this out. So between the Oculus Go making me question these highly crafted images, and then us as a team beginning to ask ourselves exactly what kind of tool were we working with here, it started to actually evolve the project. You know, being in this state where we were being faced with not solutions and answers, but suddenly questions were rising up tremendously. TLT was so there to help me through this, to keep the project moving. So I had to go back to some of my initial inspiration for this project, which was my mother's, how my mother came around progressively to being okay with, the first topic that I'm covering is, I'm calling it Gays and God. It's the cultural battle we're in right now in the United States between religion and the gay community. So I was thinking about my mother's progress over this time, and I think I was maybe oversimplifying my thinking that finally she was hearing my stories about things that I had gone through, and now she was coming around to understanding. But I think it was something deeper than that. I don't think it was that simple. So stepping off of the crafting the project and deciding that we're going to interview people, I started the screening process. I screened, I don't even know how many people, through phone interviews for a while. And ultimately we got to a place where we did some test shooting with the 360 camera. And when we did the test shooting, and initially I started pursuing undergrads. Janae on my team warned me about that. That undergrads are busy with what they're doing. They're also extremely young, and their commitment levels can be compromised by responsibilities they have as students. Grad students have a bit more commitment. They are helping to develop some of their own studies. So if this is falling in line with them, they tend to be more committed. So we began to interview students, but honestly, I was having trouble getting to where exactly do we want to hit? How do we hit the main point of this project? In the test shooting, we had the plan was to have a circle of chairs with the camera in the center, and we would have several people in this immersive video talk to you. Not all of them at once. We don't want this to be a gang up, but like there would be a different chair around you and you would have to turn to face whoever was talking to you at any one time. But it would just be you and the one person. We were getting back to the authenticity and the focus and those kind of one-liners that stick with people. And this is around the time that Janae brought in Katie Kostoritz. And Katie was doing research, which was amazing because she was videotaping people at periods and then having them view the videos afterwards. And this began to shift my thinking. Again, TLT was helping me find my way. They believed in this project. You guys voted for me. You believed in this project, but it needed some development. And they connected me with Katie, who was doing some parallel observations. And those parallel observations, again, started to help me understand the research that I was doing here, what I was actually looking for. But I was still at a loss for how do we steer this. And the TL team right there ready to help. And they brought up a name that they brought up in the beginning, a name of somebody that I know from the College of Arts and Architecture, Susan Russell. Again, her name came up. So I finally set out to meet with her. And in that meeting, her work, there was a parallel sort of with her work where she is, and Susan, forgive me if I'm getting this wrong, but in a paraphrase summation of her work, she was finding the similarities, not the differences. She was boiling down and distilling out a small list of questions, 3 to 5 to be specific, that she could ask everyone. And in my project, Gods and Gays, I can ask both sides these same questions, and the parallels are what are interesting. The parallels are what she was finding profound and interesting impact in. So that began to stir things and change things around. Now, that has brought us to where the project is now. And this is where I'll, wrap it up. But the project now it exists as about 45 questions that I was hoping to distill down to the 5 and set myself up in New York City in 2 locations to interview as many people as our batteries on the camera would allow us to do in a single day. And sort through that process. Obviously with COVID-19, I'm not sure when exactly we'll shoot. It's more likely that I'll be shooting the following summer, but that does allow me to set up 3 scenarios, not just the gays and God, but also Blacks and police violence and poverty in the United States. I think I can probably have all the questions distilled out for all of those, and we can set up an interview and then start sorting through the text. The first one right now is, like I said, it's a huge list of questions that we'll be going through process, not just me, but others, to distill down to the 5. This is going to be shot with a simple chair in a location. One of those locations for Gays and God will be Christopher Park, which is right outside of Stonewall. And another location is a church that's been there forever in the East Village in New York, where we'll focus more on the religious or the anti-gay sentiment and begin to sort through the content together. One of our problems was, so how do we get this into the hands of the people that it could affect, if that's our point? And asking both sides the same questions, making this equal to both sides actually helps us open doors in those avenues too. So right now it's the process of distilling down the questions. Once I feel like the gays and gods are ready, then I'll move on to Blacks and police violence. I think I mentioned at the lecture that I've worked at Essence for 4 years as an art director. So there's an editor there that I think that I can work with at a nicer pace through till next summer to develop the questions through her. And then take on poverty as well, so that these questions are all ready and we can simply shoot in a single chair and just take as many interviews as possible. That's where we've gone with this. And I do think this is going to be how we make the greatest impact, but I could not have possibly done this without TLT's guidance and direction and alignment with other professors at the university and their skills that they bring to the table, and the fact that I have them to guide me through this. It's just brilliant. So anyway, that's my 20 minutes, and I'm open to questions.
Hey, Rodney.
Hi.
I have a question for you. You mentioned you're going to set up filming in New York City. I was wondering if you thought about expanding filming in small towns like State College?
Absolutely, absolutely. Part of why I was focusing on a singular location and shooting everything for a particular project there is so that the environment around the person talking doesn't change dramatically, because we're shooting in 360 video. So the viewer is going to be in a location, and the person that's talking to them is going to be flipping out and changing. So to just completely be changing the environment is difficult, and it's going to be singular statements from people that we're going to be taking. The poverty one, probably, definitely there'll be a lot more out here in Pennsylvania, in the Pittsburgh area, southwestern Pennsylvania area, and then through central Pennsylvania area will probably be one of the locations for that. So the locations will be different, but I didn't really want to change them around a lot so that it doesn't start to get a little, too schizophrenic in that even the environments are changing. I hope that makes sense. Any other questions? Let me see if I... No questions. Besides, when do we get to see it? It was the whole thing was a very interesting challenge so how do we acquire the content that is most effective?
That is a good question. What formats do you foresee your viewers using?
Probably Oculus Go's, because they're least expensive, yet you get the full immersive experience. So Oculus Go's are likely to be what we would do that with.
Got some comments in our chat that everyone's very curious to see the work when it's finished. Very excited to see the final product.
Yeah, I'm putting together, I was almost going to show some elements. I'm putting together some, just for a larger pitch with it, I'm putting together smaller elements, details, but when I went through them, there just wasn't, it's not quite there yet, but again, the largest by far challenge was, how do we get at the actual content that seems like it will be the most impactful, that we will be able to get some reading about the impact that it creates.
There's a question in the Q&A from a person viewing who's not familiar with your project. Could you give a quick overview, or maybe give us some teaser sample questions that you're considering?
Sure. Yeah. So my project was basically, I believe strongly in the immersive technologies to make greater impact with regards to communication. I'm from an art directing, creative directing, design, communications design background, 3 decades of it. And, I've worked in mass media, so I was interested in, the larger possibilities of influence or suggestion, and a lot of the I've been manipulating and working with different kinds of media formats for a long time, for giant companies to influence people to buy things or to think things or whatever. Considering that we are dangling off a cliff with our polarized condition here, it did seem like we should some of us should start thinking about, how do we steer things back? And immersive technologies seem to be so much more impactful. So my idea was to simply shoot 360 3D videos that you could wear VR on, and you would be in a moment and position yourself in a proximity with somebody who's talking to you, not quite within that space where it's uncomfortable and you want to get away from them, but close enough that you kind of can't walk away. You kind of can't just dismiss it so easily, and you need to hear it. It's for you. And so how do we conduct interviews and address and pointedly go after some of these polarized conditions that we're facing in the bigger world? And so the first topic, I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian home. I am a gay man in a relationship with I'm engaged to a guy. And so how did I make this, these are right now in 2020, these are two sides of an argument that are totally at each other. And so I was trying to find the place in between where people could begin to understand that, at least in America, we should have the right to be and live, as we should, as we feel is okay. And if we're not hurting people by it, then we should just go. And I wanted to create an understanding so that it's just not this endless battle that we seem to live in now, where it's like, yeah, but my rights, look, let's just start grasping each other. So the first topic I'm calling Gays and God. But another topic, having been an art director of Essence for 4 years, I was there when Trayvon Martin was shot. And suddenly the office was abuzz. And it wasn't until one of the editors, after a meeting, that this whole thing about this conversation with their children kept coming up, that I went in and talked to her and realized that I had no idea that Black children, even before they have the sex or the drug conversation, with every parent in America is supposed to have. Don't do drugs. Here's the ins and outs about sex. Well, even before that, Black families who are taking responsibility for their kids have to talk to their kids about surviving a police encounter. What? And it changed. It was a paradigm shift for me with regards to Black families living in America. If this is something that you have to teach your 7 or 8 year old child, what? I think that people need to understand the conditions of things, especially now when you watch white folks saying, hey, this is slavery, that I have to wear a mask and stuff. I think you need to do a little bit of reading about what exactly slavery was, because I think wearing masks and plastic gloves and having to stay home is not even close to an association. These are kind of areas that I'd like to address. And poverty is another one. We are really demonizing poverty. So poverty will be the third one. Once we see how these roll, then it will increase the number of topics that we can cover on this subject.
Thank you, Rodney. I'm so sorry to cut this off again. It's a great topic, and thank you so much for sharing your work on your Walk a Mile project with our audience today. On behalf of the symposium team, I'd like to again thank all of our presenters. Even though you cannot hear our applause, we are certainly applauding your efforts to transform your teaching and enhance the learning experience for all of our Penn State students. So lastly, thank you to the audience members for taking the time to join us this morning, and we look forward to seeing you all at our session next week. Thank you.
Thank you.